Radio Central, my Kiwi House breakfast. Well, this morning it's the CODC, well this hour anyway, CODC breakfast. Mayor Tim and Chief Executive Sanchia, good morning to you both.
Morning, Shane.
Good morning.
Yes, we're talking the long-term plan and framing our future.
Yeah, so the LTP, just to start at a very 101 level, is our 10-year budgets, which are done every 3 years. And so immediately it sounds a little bit Irish. And I do want to clarify that everything we say today, none of it is April Fool's Day stuff. Okay?
No, it is the gospel.
It is the gospel. But every 3 years we have to do a budget into the next 10 years. In fact, for some infrastructure, it's into the next 30. But this is the 10-year plan or the long-term plan. And people might sort of go, well, how come everybody's throwing these at us at the same time? Because you're reading in the paper, and you've had Gary on today talking about the ORC's one. That's because legislatively all the local bodies have, including regional councils, have to do this by the 30th of June. So they do all come up at the same time. But for the people of Central Otago, whether you're a renter, an owner, a holiday home owner or whatever, this is probably the most important document for the next 3 years.
Okay, well, we're here to talk about that document, and we've thrown it out there for people to come in with questions, and I think this is the first lot of questions fits in with the LTP. How do you feel you went in succeeding with the last 10-year plan, and did you miss anything out that you would have liked to get done? Have they been added into this long-term plan, if that's the case?
Wow, that's a really good question. How did we go with the last 10-year plan? I guess for me, personally, at this stage, I would have thought that we'd have had the water into Alex sorted, but things get thrown into the mix, and Lindavia turned up in the lake. So last LTP, we were talking about having the better water here. The pipeline's in place, but we've had to redesign, and it's set us back by over a year, because when we found the Lindavia, which was going to stop the plant that we wanted to build actually functioning, because the filters wouldn't work. When we found it, we needed to then wait another summer for it to build up again to make sure that Plan B was going to work. So that's a disappointment, but it's totally understandable, and actually good fortune that we didn't put the filtration plant in, because it wouldn't have worked. I can't think of anything that we didn't put in the last one. If we did, it's 3 years ago now, a lot of water under the bridge, but this one now has the things that the community boards and the councillors and staff have gone right out of the things that the community have said they want and need. These have reached the top of the pile, but really have to emphasise that the bulk of the LTP is BAU. It's business as usual. We've got 5 big ticket items, you might speak, but the rest of it is just the mechanics of the budgets of doing what we do.
This one may be for you, Sanchia. What things can you take out of the last long-term plan to improve efficiency over the next 10 years?
To improve efficiency, well, I think there's a heap of things we've probably done in the last long-term plan to improve things for the next 10 years in terms of efficiency. We've changed the way that we do a number of things, and particularly in relation to water and some of the water projects that are coming on that will mean better efficiencies for this district, and how we're approaching some of the government legislation and reform programs, and particularly again relating to water, focusing on resilience for our network as we look at that reform program, and we're trying to work smarter and focus on what we really need to do. So we're often sitting in front of council and saying, sure, we can do that, but what don't we do? How do we focus on those things that really matter?
And just for our listeners, that I'm firing these questions off to Tim and Sanchia, they haven't had any prior warning, so if it takes a bit of time to get their heads around it, then please be patient.
Does that mean it's a real tricky one next?
No. How do you prioritise objectives in the long-term plan?
So one thing we can't do in a long-term plan is to go out to the community and say, hey, what do you want? Because we've got to get this thing done and dusted by the 30th of June. So we need to be able to basically funnel things through from well over a year ago. In fact, in some cases even longer. The classic case in this is the Cromwell Master Plan. So that process began 2.5 years ago? Yeah, a long time ago. And that helped Cromwell identify what its priorities were. And now the LTP essentially has what those priorities are going to cost. And so what do you want to do? How much do you want to do? When do you want to do it by? Are now in here. So you also have, as I mentioned earlier on, you have 26 elected members who are there to hear the concerns of the community and to try to work out which ones are going to reach the top, because you simply can't do everything. So we've now got the things that we think are the priorities, and it's for the community to say what they think about them.
Just an aside from this, 26 elected members for 22,000 people, is that too many?
No comment.
And I couldn't possibly comment.
As a non-elected member.
We've got 26 really good people. We've got 12 on the council, and the rest are spread over community boards. And there is an argument and a discussion whether community boards. This is at a national level whether community boards should remain. But that's a topic for another day.
You mentioned Cromwell, Tim, and the big thing about Cromwell is a memorial hall. It's had a large amount of money spent on it over the last few years, and the progress doesn't seem to be getting any faster. It is outlined that this is being paid for by the ratepayers. Can the ratepayers expect to see progress in the near future? I guess it comes down to how they react to the Cromwell Master Plan.
Yeah, so the Cromwell Hall, and you've said it's the biggest thing, and that's a really interesting question for Cromwell, so I'll come back to that. But there has been a lot of work done on the hall in terms of 3 years ago, or 4.5 years ago now, it was all set for a refurbish, a massive refurbish. That got stopped and everything had to restart again. Nothing happens terribly quickly, but through the master plan it was like, okay, what is it that you actually want? Because there was a consultation that led the previous, or 2 community boards ago, to say, well, refurb, and then it had to restart again to say, what do you want? And now there's options in here for not just what do you want, how big do you want it, but the bigger question for Cromwell, and I oversimplify it to say, which do you want first, the hall or the mall? Because 2 of the things that came out of the master plan was the mall doesn't work as a commercial sector, and that's not really a surprise. And the other one was we need the hall sorted, the arts and heritage precinct sorted. So there's 4 options for Cromwell in terms of that, and oversimplifying them again. Do you want to do nothing? That's one. Do you want to do the hall first, including the broader arts and cultural centre? Do you want to do the mall first? Or do you want to do both at the same time? And you'll note in the document the council's preferred option has been do both at the same time. And there's a couple of reasons why that's there, because that's the most expensive option in the short term. But one of the reasons I think council has said that would be the preferred option is, well, it's never cheaper to build stuff than now. But the other thing is, there is going to be quite a discussion in Cromwell, if it's not all at the same time, whether it's the hall or the mall first, and it's not our place before the consultation to weigh up which of those we thought was the priority. For me, that was the bigger reason that I said, well, the preferred option is the hybrid, and let's see what Cromwell, and to emphasise the rest of the district, have to say about that, because some of the stuff in Cromwell is a districtised cost. So people listening who aren't in Cromwell, you've got a hand to play in this as well, and need to have a look at the document.
So on Cromwell, how is the proposal to build upwards in Cromwell going to affect the natural beauty of our landscape and the tourism that comes with it?
That's a really good question. So through the master plan, one of the things, that's more a spatial plan and district plan component than the district plan, but to address it, we went to, and again oversimplifying, we went to the people of Cromwell and the district around it and said, by 2040 you're expecting to have 13 to 14,000 people. Where are we going to put them? And that figure still remains even though the COVID's happened. So where are we going to put them? How are we going to allow that development to happen? How are we going to manage that development? Here's some thoughts. Do you want us to make Tarras and Bannockburn and Pies and Moorings bigger? And the resounding voice was, no, we quite like those small villages how they are. Righto. Do you want us to grow up the hills? No, that was a resounding no. We do not want to see residential houses, lights on the hills and everything. That's part of our natural beauty. All right, do you want us to tear up horticultural ground around the town and make that bigger? No, we don't. And that was seen in the reaction to Plan Change 13. So when all those other options were taken away and the reality remained that growth is coming and you can't stop it, you can't stop people coming, the remaining fact that the remaining option that most people said, if we've got to do something, this is what we've got to do, is to remain in the current Cromwell footprint but go smaller and go upwards, because that's where you're going to put the people otherwise.
We should emphasise, so upwards in Cromwell is not upwards like you might see in a city.
No.
So you're talking 2 to 4 stories, not skyscrapers.
Yeah.
Well, so, and pertinent to that was what percentage of people engaged in the consultation? I think for Cromwell Master Plan was about 9%, wasn't it? And who voted Cromwell to be the next Gold Coast?
No idea what that means. We've got 13 to 14,000 people estimated population. That's people wanting to come. If you don't plan for people to come, then they come anyway. And guess what happens? Your house prices go screaming through the roof because you haven't planned for those people to be there. And we're seeing a bit of that now. So we can either sit there and go, we don't want this to happen, and I'm sorry, I know Trump's not in power, but we can't build a wall at the Roaring Meg. People are going to come because this is a great place to live. We either don't do anything and the prices will mean that only some people, maybe less people come, but you're not going to have a good broad demographic of people and you run out of workers and so forth. So I'm not sure what they mean about the next Gold Coast.
All right, Chief Executive Sanchia and Mayor Tim. And we're going to be catching up with Sanchia right now because I have a heap of questions that need, she's probably the only person who can answer them. So let's get stuck into it, Sanchia. An organisational sustainability team was established in 2019 to provide a greater environmental consciousness within the organisational culture. This group has failed to gain traction during 2020 due to workload and capacity constraints. Why were the additional resources not allocated during 2020 despite a climate crisis being declared in 2019, and what will happen in 2021?
Yeah, sure. So the first thing I just wanted to comment on the sustainability team is that at CODC, when we talk about sustainability, it's not only about the environment, it's about all of the things that make this a sustainable place to live. And part of that includes affordability for our communities, as well as all those environmental considerations. So when COVID hit in 2020, one of Council's core roles was around civil defence and leading the response for Central Otago to the pandemic. And a lot of our existing resource was refocused on responding to the immediate pandemic response. So that's during lockdown, all the things we had to do. It seems crazy now because we didn't have to do so much of the things that we thought were coming. Mass burials and all those sorts of things that at the time we were having to prepare for. But that doesn't mean that nothing happened. Our commitment to the climate crisis is unwavering, and that's a priority for this council. So we didn't stop doing things in 2020, we just didn't progress everything that we wanted to. And in 2021, heaps is going to happen, but I know there's lots of questions from Nigel, so I suspect some of my answers will cover that.
Okay, projects, what urgency has been given to CO2 emission reductions, and what is the proposed timetable for projects to achieve emissions reductions that are included in current and future funding programs, replacing gas-fired heating at the Cromwell Pool?
Yep, so that's programmed to occur later this year, and the only thing that that's dependent on is supply chains and some of the components coming out of Germany for us to be able to do that. But that being said, that should be done later this year.
Nice. Replacing coal-fired heating at the William Fraser building?
So we're doing a business case for that right now, and after we get through this winter, we'll be hoping to progress that project.
A replacement of council vehicles with hybrids and electric vehicles.
You'll actually, even in our consultation document, I think we said we're almost at 50% of electric or hybrid vehicles. As of today, we're at 54%, and by next month we should be at 60%. So there's actually nothing stopping us getting to 100% of our fleet vehicles being electric or hybrid or other options as technology becomes available. The only caveat probably is that we'll always have at least a vehicle on fleet that gets us into the back country or into some tricky situations as we need to respond to civil defence emergencies.
Just on the vehicles, are they on a lease 3-year term?
No, so we purchase our vehicles and we do that through the all of government contract, so we get a really good rate for that, and there's a sweet spot where you want to sell them off and replace them. So as we replace them with more sustainable options.
Cool, because I think electric vehicles are just going to be a fly-by-night thing, aren't they? Hydrogen's what's going to happen.
Vehicles don't fly, don't be ridiculous.
Yours does. Yours is pretty speedy.
So with that government, I guess that preferential buying through government, does that stops you buying vehicles locally?
No, not at all. So we do deal with local providers.
Car dealers?
Yep.
Cool. Encouraging walking and cycling. I guess that's not really up to the council, is it?
Oh, part of it is. So in the last few years, we've spent over $1 million on walking and cycling networks. That includes things like the clip-on the Bannockburn Bridge. We've put in a new cycle path from Omako to Ophir, and footpaths, of course, all around the district. That sits into our budgets, and that's part of the long-term plan. And in the next 10-year plan, in today's dollars, we've got $1 million of new paths and $3.2 million of cycle facilities provided for. We also have a member of staff who puts 5 hours of their week into actively promoting walking and cycling within the community. And on top of that, our tourism team is working really closely with the cycling trails to think about how do we promote those trails to the rest of New Zealand and visitors that come here, but also get our own communities out onto them more often so they're champions for them as well.
Nice, and we should let our listeners know that because this is fairly complex, I did get this email yesterday and I forwarded it on to Tim and Sanchia, so we could have the answers for you. Reducing water demand.
Yep. So we're already one of the very few councils in New Zealand that have volumetric charging, and when we introduced that, our consumption went down by 30%, so that's pretty significant. That said, what we've done is a review of large users across our district, and we've realised that we're one of our own biggest customers in terms of public space irrigation.
Yes.
And so at the moment, the council has put into the long-term plan $1.1 million to separate our public space irrigation off town supply, and that will reduce the demand on treated water, which in turn will have us see a significant reduction in emissions that are related to that treatment. And I think that's a really important part of us walking the talk around our own sustainability strategy.
It is good taking it off the normal supply. I was, when was I? Yesterday, I think. I was in Cromwell and I was watching Alpha Street being irrigated, and I was thinking, I wonder where that's coming from, when it could all be coming straight out of the river, but just below it.
I think it's a bore, isn't it, Alpha Street?
Off the top of my head,
Yeah,
I
I mean, that's...
yeah.
Yes, an awful lot of them are taken from bores for the major
Yep.
parks and
Well,
so forth.
across the road's a good example of
Yeah.
that.
Reducing waste to landfill, including sludge.
Yeah, this is a really complex part of our business at the moment, and for councils across the whole country. In late 2020, we did undertake a waste audit, and that's given us some really valuable information around the makeup of the Central Otago waste stream. We're using that data to identify opportunities for changes to the kind of services that we provide, and most of those will be implemented in 2023 when existing contracts expire. We're also doing a review of our waste facilities, so that's so that we can look at the future of how we reuse, recycle and transfer facilities, make the most of our transfer facilities. And at the moment we're also considering extended green waste and food waste and how we construct and demolish other facilities as well as they currently exist. And we'll also do regular audits of curbside recycling. We all know that when our recycling is contaminated, it ends up going to landfill. So it's really important that we continue to monitor that and that we give feedback to property owners on that. And more recently, council has actually adopted a bylaw. And what that bylaw will enable us to do is to enforce repeat offenders, if you like, to make sure that we're getting as much recycling going to where it should and not into landfill, which is really, really important.
Mm. Yeah, which is kind of hard when you've got seasonal workers. Or rather, unless you go through them all, or every bin on your own,
Well,
they're not as fastidious as you might be, Tim.
I don't think we have any evidence at the moment, though, to suggest that there's any one part of the community that's got more contamination than another.
So the emissions for Three Waters will more than double once the carbon implications from treatment processes and wastewater disposal are added. So is the proposed development of a sludge dryer going to increase emissions?
So we're looking at a sludge drying facility to be included in the Alexandra wastewater treatment plant upgrade, which will happen between 2025 and 2028. And that sludge treatment will reduce the volume of sludge that is taken to landfill by a factor of 6. So actually the sludge dryer will significantly reduce waste to landfill and therefore emissions, not increase them.
And working at a very basic level, doesn't that sludge give off methane if we don't dry it, which is a worse gas?
Methane is
I'm
what
guessing
cows
that.
burp, isn't it?
Well, it's all waste. It's not just cows.
What energy reduction measures are proposed for the Three Waters process?
Yeah, that's also an interesting topic for us at the moment because the government is going through quite a significant reform program in relation to Three Waters for councils. So in our last long-term plan, we were very focused on sustainability in relation to our Three Waters networks. We've shifted that focus a bit for this long-term plan and right now to ensure resilience in our network, to make sure that if amalgamation does happen of Three Water networks, that Central Otago is as best prepared as it can be to have good water services in this district. So over the next 3 years, that means we're prioritising projects around water safety, wastewater discharge quality and improving the resilience of existing supplies.
The waste reduction work by CODC is contradicted by having a mixed glass waste collection system and then investing in a crusher. Why not separate and reuse as glass?
Yeah, look, it's actually not practical to colour separate the volume of glass that we get through our curbside collections. So the glass crushing facility that we're talking about in this long-term plan will enable us to use the product across our district in some of our construction projects, which is quite exciting. If we don't do that, the alternative would actually be for that glass to be transported through to landfill, and obviously that's unacceptable to us and unacceptable to people in our district. You want to say something, Tim?
Or transported to Auckland for recycling, because that's the only place in New Zealand that properly recycles glass.
Oh,
and
I
there's
know,
carbon
isn't it?
getting it up there. You
So
can't win with it.
So I was going to say that at the moment, that's what happens. It goes off to Christchurch and then up to Auckland, and that's no good for our environment either. So at the moment, the level of contamination allowed has been made more strict, and so that's why it's really important we get that recycling right. And the only way we meet requirements is if you can manually separate the glass like they do at Wastebusters, but what I'd note is that Wastebusters has just stopped separating the colours as well, so it's now all glass together there as well.
Wastebusters used to do it. They separated the glass, didn't
Yep.
they? And we went off in different containers, but
Yep.
once again, all the way to Auckland.
Yep, and that's now changed. So now
Yeah.
I live rurally, so I took my bottles into Wastebusters just last week, and yeah, they all go into the same bin now.
Okay. All right. Well, Nigel, we hope you're happy with those answers. Thank you for all the research done, Sanchia. And I think the three of us should take an opportunity to mention Maria, because she's working some long hours. I get emails from her at midnight and then again at 6 in the morning. So that one came through at 6:06 this morning. She woke up thinking about that song.
Yeah, she's doing awesome work, and the whole media team is. And the LTP is a huge amount of work for staff. It's a huge amount of work for everyone involved. And it's going to be a good day on the 30th of June, whatever's in it, when it's behind us, and then we can start looking at Three Waters reform.
And I'm glad you mentioned that too, because I think sometimes people don't realise the amount of work that goes into these things, and there are people like Maria who's sitting up way too late at night, and Maria will have to talk about that later. But you know, she's doing these really long hours to make sure the community knows about what's going on with this.
Yeah, and well, she chose that song because it mentions about you can talk about how you can start speaking up, and does take a bit of bravery to state your views. For some people, say what you want to say and let the words fall out. Be brave.
Yeah. And that's what we want. We want people to submit to this. Our last LTP 3 years ago, we had 1 in 40 people submit, which is fantastic. But it's not all about the numbers. Numbers are great, but it's about the breadth and the width of the people of the demographic. So if we just hear from one demographic, then we get a very distorted view of what the community wants. This is the community's voice for the next 3 and 10 years, depending on how you look at it, but certainly for the next 3. And it's really important that we hear from young people, from old people, from renters, from owners, from everybody.
Okay, so well, we're talking off air about the different things that are happening. We've got the Cromwell Master Plan, we've got the Riverside development in Alex, and I've got a question here. Do the separate proposed developments in Alex and Cromwell look across the entire district and provide a cohesive plan for Central Otago, or are they creating bigger and better services in one area?
That's an interesting question, and I think there can be a little bit of patch mentality in Central Otago, where we think, well, if something's happening up there, how does that help me here? We're 23,000 people. We're a drop in the bucket, and if we start going in our silos of this town or that town's doing better, what we need to realise is that Alexandra's candle burning brighter doesn't dim the candle of Omako. It actually helps everybody. We all rise together on the same tide. And the bigger things are generally going to come to the centres. You're not going to have a master plan for a rural area necessarily. I mean, we do have things like that in the district plan, but the LTP also covers things like roading, which intricately connect all of our towns. It's got the water supplies for the very small places. It is the whole district's plan. And for anybody to think, well, there's nothing in it for me, or it doesn't affect me in any way, please have a good read of it and see if you come to that conclusion. If you're still sitting there, give me a ring. I'd love to talk it through with you.
Rather ironically, you've both opened a page district museum function, and this question is, if CODC were to deliver in-house museums function, what would happen to the existing management structure of Central Stories?
Well, I don't want to get ahead on what would happen there. So just to step back, what are we talking about here? The district museum function. Central Otago District Council, either in cash or kind, and through the boards as well, spends just around about $350,000 a year on our museums, between 6 or 7 of them across the district. They're run by and large by extraordinarily dedicated and well-meaning volunteers, but there hasn't been a lot of coordination to what they do, what story they tell. Are we all telling the same story, which is duplication? Are we all telling the full story? What is the best way to approach that? And what is the best way to manage the future for our museum? So at the moment, we've got promulgations of a new museum in Cromwell, a really hard push for a new museum in Clyde, and of course we've got the District Museum straight over the road from us here in Alexandra. And I'm sorry, it would have to be madness, in my opinion, for the district to have 3 museums within 30 kilometres. So that's the very biggest item of we need some coordination. So we're saying, well, here's some options for the community to think about. Do we just not have council coordinate it and let the sector carry on like it's been carrying on? Do we take funding out of the that is with the Alexandra District Museum at the moment and put that in-house to deliver the museum function? And it's for the museum committee to decide what a consequence that has over the road. Or do we increase rates and keep that function over there, the district museum function that lies with Alexandra District Museum Incorporated, and do we duplicate that by paying someone else to do it at council as well? So that's the options that are there for the public to have a think about.
Well, I had my say. I've already done that, and there's been an incentive from council now. If you do it today, then or tomorrow, Friday tomorrow, then you got 4 chances for a $50 supermarket voucher. That's going to happen every week. You probably didn't even know about that, or you did?
I knew.
You signed it off?
I knew. Yeah, I thought I might submit myself just to...
Yeah.
to be in. You've got to be in.
It spurred me when I know I probably can't win it, but there you go. Is the proposed development on the waterfront for the greater benefit, this is Alexandra, of course, for the greater benefit of the community or small selection of business owners? We talked a little bit about this off air. They too, and this is why I've mentioned it because of the museum thing, they too propose to focus on the heritage of Alexandra. Would it make more sense to throw a pile of money at developing the space we already have, which I guess is Central Stories?
Well, let's wind it back again and make sure people know what we're talking about. So at the bottom end of Lower Tarbert Street, where the Clutha Matao and the Manyahita Kia meet, it's a beautiful spot. Mm-hmm. And confluences of rivers are traditionally places where things happen. They're just gorgeous. And for a long time, Rory McClellan and a very good trust of people have been working, and we're talking, I don't know, it could be 10 years, it could be longer. It's been an incredibly long time, particularly for Rory, to say we need to do something with this beautiful asset. We need to give people a reason to not just drive through Alex. It's very hard for us to develop anything on the main road because it's state highway. It's easier for us to do stuff down there. What we're proposing and putting to the community is, are we going to secure that land and make it, basically create the canvas for what may happen next? And will it become another historical site? It was the original talk was sort of a miners' village. Look, whether it works out that way or not, I think we'll see. But that is also going to be the junction of all the bike trails in Central Otago. Will be right there once they're all completed. So you start to think, well, but in terms of if something happens at that end of Tarbert Street, it has to help the whole of Alexandra. Indeed, it has to help the whole of Central, because you have another reason for people to come here. So I'm hoping people aren't thinking that there's self-interest at that end of town for doing this, because that's...
Yeah, well, it may flow on to Marco, Ophir, Teviot Valley, that sort of stuff.
Could I add to that as well, though, is the part that we're talking about investing in this long-term plan isn't anything to do with telling a heritage story. It's about opening up access to the waterfront for the community. So it's a place where the community will be able to go, sit, enjoy and recreate. Yep. And I think that's something that we have this amazing waterfront and we don't have access to it in a way that you might find in other places around New Zealand and around the world. So I think this is a really exciting chance to regenerate that part of town.
Could we just put it over the other side, though, where it would be north facing?
There's development happening over there too.
And then the key in the LTP is that how you're asking how it should be funded, whether it's fully funded and all that. So those are the questions.
Yep.
What's next? There are many privately owned facilities. I guess this is the new development for Cromwell with Hall. There are many privately owned facilities and community facilities which can house weddings and events in and around Cromwell already. Would a community facility not compromise these business owners and or detract from other community spaces, that is Bannockburn Hall, Terrace Hall, Lowburn, as part of the appeal of Central Otago, our boutique businesses and spaces?
What a great question.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and potentially yes. So if the hall is rebuilt or whatever happens with the hall in Cromwell and it becomes an attractive facility, yeah. But does that mean you don't build it? Because it's an attractive facility for a wedding, but it's also going to be there for a whole lot of other things that perhaps the private sector isn't catering to at the moment.
And I think that's why it's really important we're going through the process we are now, so that everybody can have their say and raise those sorts of questions. Had we just gone ahead and done it, then there wouldn't be that opportunity.
And further to that, what would happen to our boutique cinemas if a larger one was established in Cromwell? Does Central need another cinema? So that's what people have to ask, don't they?
Yeah, but look, I've got a fundamental concern about council doing things that the private sector are already doing, and I've expressed that on regular occasions. But that's a voice to be heard in this conversation that person's raising there. But there are a multitude of reasons to have a town hall other than the specific things.
Interesting too, on a much more smaller scale, a question's been posed. Queenstown is a good example, with 5 Mile taking tenants from Frankton and leaving that area looking like a ghost town. And if we do this big development with a cultural here down in Cromwell, is that going to take everything from a mall that desperately needs help? And I kind of like my idea, and people say that's cultural and sports should be, well, sport is culture really. Put it all at Anderson Park, which is basically the hub of Cromwell.
Yeah, I guess a lot of that conversation was held through the master plan, and Cromwell's spoken on how it wants its growth to develop. So this is what we've been left with. The master plan made it very clear. It was a very good process that gave a very clear consensus view of what was wanted. We've now got the price tag. And
it's also not a big area, so you go to Cromwell, actually where the heritage precinct will be, and that's what the community has told us, and where the mall are, your retail area, where your sports areas is, it's all a 20-minute walk from each other. It's not a big area.
Yeah.
We're talking about framing our future with Tim and Sanchia. A couple of big projects that we haven't talked about is the Omako Community Hall, or the community space, which, interestingly enough, incorporates the sports.
Yeah, and that again, that has been a very long process in that township, but that's got a let's be optimistic and say not fit for purpose town hall, and they've gone, right, this is how we see the best way forward, is to build a combined community hub where the rugby club room is now. So there's options in there for how it's funded, and included, as it always is, just don't want to do it. So there's that one, and there's also, very importantly too, in the Teviot, the Roxburgh community pool upgrade. So there's options there to support or not support the pool, and then where the funding and how the funding should come from. And that's, for those two small towns, very big projects that have been a long time coming.
And when you do the stuff online, those, if you're not in the Manuhira or the Teviot Valley, then you don't answer those questions. You just skip over for the.
You can, but it's
it's only for ratepayers down there, isn't it?
Yeah.
They're the only ones that'll pay for it. Others can have an opinion, of course, but we've tried to make it clear through the submission document where it will impact your rates depending on where you live. So they're the questions you really need to answer.
That's a big draw card on a small amount of people, isn't it?
It really is, and we're very blessed in Central Otago to have CLT, which will come, has stepped up and helped with these projects, probably more so than council in some cases, but it is. But those communities have said that this is the crunch point for both those processes, and obvious reasons, because this is the time for the community to say, right, we've talked about doing it, we've talked about wanting it, it's ready to go, am I willing to pay for it?
Is that a decision that's already been made, or can it be, if the majority of the 22,500 people in Central said, let's spread it right across and get it all done, that could be done? So, as a ratepayer, I'd stump up for Roxburgh and Omako.
It's the complexities that we have with having very strong community ward-based structures, and the way that that's worked, and it's not a process for the LTP to unravel that. Some communities don't do that. They do distritise, and we've distritised our Three Waters, which is a really massive part of the infrastructure. A lot of places haven't done that yet. So that's an argument for a discussion for another day, is whether everything gets paid for by everybody. And oddly enough, it's been the argument that I've just lost to try to get Aurora's costs to be spread over everybody.
Yes,
so.
yeah, and ORC too, with stuff like Lake Hayes and that. Anything, Sanchia, you want to do? Because we're running out of time rapidly. Anything you want to say before I've got one more question to fire at you.
You go for that question.
Yeah, go for that
question.
Yep.
Well, it's just come in. Has anyone asked about the weed in the lake and who is responsible for looking to control the rapid spread that is choking the waterway for recreational users?
Yeah, so I can answer that because I sit on the Lake Dunstan Weed Management Group, and it is definitely a significant problem, but it's also a really hard to fix problem. So the first thing with the weed in Lake Dunstan is until you get rid of it in Lake Wanaka, you're not really going to achieve much because it just floats downstream. And the weed is particularly ugly at the moment. I don't have in front of me, but there's significant money spent every year on controlling it in
$200,000.
Yeah, well,
$200,000 for 22 years. That's been happening.
Is that how much one group puts in? I think it's more. Anyway, I don't have the figures in front of me, but it's a significant amount of money. And would we ever eradicate the weed from the lake? The measures that we can use to get rid of it are really not that ideal. You know, the spraying. A lot of people really hate the spraying of it because you're putting chemicals into the lake. Even though it is the most effective way, it still only works with limited climatical situations. Hand weeding, all those things, very, very difficult. And actually, council sits in an advocacy position there. It's not our lake. And the weed is ugly, there's no question.
Yeah, it is. We need to do something about it. I think we can do something about it, so we're trying to motivate that. I do have some more questions for you. Thank you, Sanchia. What does the council intend to do regards the silt build-up around Old Cromwell, and do they consider this a problem? We've just touched on that.
The silt build-up is a shocker. There's as much silt comes down that river every year as there is concrete in the Clyde Dam, and it's always been known to the powers that be that was going to happen. Now that it's been happening ever since the dam was built. It's just now reached Cromwell and became obvious to people. I think managing it's going to become a braided river essentially, but trying to manage it and make it look decent while it happens is going to be the bigger battle, because I don't think it's going to be stopped.
Another one concerned about all the traffic that's going to go onto the cycle trail between Cromwell and Clyde, affecting the rail trail. What has been done to address this, but I think it's going to increase the traffic.
It's going to grow the pie. We're going to have the biggest bicycle network in the Southern Hemisphere, and the rail trail's A, going to be the granddaddy of them all, and B, is the most accessible for the most people because it's mostly flat. So I think it's just going to grow the traffic.
What provisions are there to encourage more development of jobs in the region and encourage more local start-up businesses?
Well, I can speak to the start-up part if you want to speak to jobs, Tim.
Sure.
We actually have started a Startup Central group, and they meet regularly. There's a Facebook group. People can go along to that. There's speakers there. There's people that have started up their own business, and they come and share their journey, and people can connect there. And we also have a Think Drinks, which is part of that, where people can come along and have a drink, alcoholic or not, and talk about what they're thinking about and encourage each other and motivate each other to do sort of start up and innovate new businesses.
And in terms of the broader question, we've got a really great economic development manager who sits in that space and works with many industries and works really hard with them, Nick Lanham, to encourage business growth. And the number one thing the council can do is provide a healthy environment economically and socially and culturally for Central Otago to be attractive to businesses. That's the first priority, and I think we're doing a good job of it.
Here's a pretty interesting one. Are council making provisions to make existing local businesses aware of council contracts? I feel there is a lack of these currently for those who are unaware of government tendering systems and Tenderlink.
Well, we are required, of course, to tender our projects in a certain way so that there's full transparency around that process, and so we do that through the way that we post those, and so any business that's capable of taking on those jobs will be a part of those sorts of systems, and indeed a number of local businesses are. And we have recently re-looked at our procurement strategy as well and made provision to give weighting to local businesses to apply for those, which is something we think is really important.
Yeah, I saw that where you're going to maybe break down some stuff so the smaller businesses can apply.
Well, it's not. You've still got to have the scale to do it. It's not a matter of smaller businesses. If you're able to do the job, then you're going to be in for it. But you're not going to have a two-person plumbing outfit take over our water infrastructure. You know,
Yeah.
it's the scale's there, but certainly it's open for everyone.
Something like what I've seen around that, Whitestone Contracting, owned by the Oamaru Waitaki District Council, and doing work in here. I know when they get those contracts, then they employ people here and blah blah blah. But It's a
It's
funny one,
it's a
isn't it?
really difficult balance because you can say, right, we're going to give it to locals, and then what happens? The price goes through the roof. And price is significant too because that gets extended out in rates. So there's a number of different factors. The ability to do the job now, your track record, the cost, where you and we took a bit of flack over one contract that was let out last year. I can't remember which one it was, but actually the motel sector were really grateful that it was out of towners at a time when COVID had destroyed a lot of their business. So there's those other benefits that you might not see straight away. So there's a lot of factors to take into account in those.
Well, I need to thank you both. It's been an hour that's just absolutely flown by. I want to thank everyone that contributed to the questions. It's really encouraging to know that there's people from 15 to, maybe 90 odd tuned into Radio Central and care enough to send some questions through.
No, I think, Shane. I think we're blessed in Central Otago to have a local radio station. There wouldn't be, in fact, I'll ask how many mayors in the rural sector actually have the ability to come into a locally owned and operated station and be able to talk directly with the local population on important stuff like this. And I'm probably I could be one of one in all honesty in the country. We're very lucky.
And first time for you, Sanchia, so we need to make this maybe a monthly occurrence where we get the Chief Executive in to have a chat about what's happening.
I think that's a great idea.
We'll talk about it.